I'm quoting now your children. If you can give us the distilled version, the 5-minute lecture on what the propaganda model is, and you wrote the book originally in 1988, and then I want to sort of push you on how that stands now.
Well, actually, I should say that most of the work on the propaganda model itself was due to my colleague, Edward Herman. He's a professor of finance. In fact, professionally, he was a specialist in corporate power and corporate control, wrote the standard work on it. And it's, I mean, I agreed with it, but I can't take credit for it. It was mostly his initiative. And I didn't totally agree for reasons I'll tell you. But what it is a discussion of the institutional structure of the media. It's looking at the US media, so not state media, but corporate media. And asks an obvious question. If you look at the institutional structure and you ask what content you would expect to flow from it, what would you predict? And briefly, without going into the details, the media are huge corporations, parts of larger conglomerates. They sell, like other businesses, they sell a product to a market. The market is other businesses, advertisers. The product is people. So they sell people to advertisers. So television, for example, makes no profit if you turn on the tube, but they get it from the advertisers. And the newspapers mostly lose money when you subscribe. They do better from the advertising. So the first part of it is it's major corporations selling people to other corporations. And then there are other factors, like it's very easy to show that the corporate system is very tightly linked to government. People flow in and out. And then the government itself produces just plain state propaganda, and that enters. And other factors like that. Now we ask, well, what would you expect to happen? What you'd expect to see overwhelmingly is a choice of issues and framing of issues which reflects the interests and concerns of the state corporate nexus. That's what you'd predict. And then the rest of the book is running through examples. It's been a little misunderstood. It's a lot of journalists regard it as a criticism of journalists. It's exactly the opposite. In fact, about a third of the book, the latter third, I suspect nobody ever read it, is a defense of journalists against attacks from liberals, from Freedom House. You know, the Freedom House wrote a vicious attack, couple volumes of attacks on American journalists for stabbing the United States in the back in Vietnam and losing the Vietnam War and so on. And it's two volumes, one commentary and the other the documentary background for it. And I'm kind of a masochist, so I actually read the documents. I'm probably the only person who ever read them. When you read the documents, you find that the commentary is totally falsified. And in fact, what it shows is that the journalists did an honest, courageous job. What they saw, they described accurately, and the criticisms are mostly fabricated. But they did it within the framework of an interpretation which is super chauvinistic. So, for example, if the United States carried out some atrocity, it was a mistake, or the other side somehow caused it to do it, and then they leave things out. But the actual reporting was first-rate, and I think you can trust it. It's typically the case. So it's a defense of journalism which the journalists didn't like.
But how are the journalists able to do that kind of reporting that you do trust if they are simultaneously framing it in a way that you don't trust?
I mean, journalism's, you know, it's honest professionals. They have integrity. They, especially working in the field, takes a lot of courage, and they do an excellent job. But within a narrow structure, like there are certain topics that just won't report, not out of their, it might be editorial pressure. And when they do report it, the framework is essentially a patriotic framework. You can see it all the time. I mean, we give lots of examples.
And in the book you distinguish, or you say that the media distinguishes between worthy victims and unworthy victims. Yeah. And worthy victims tend to be the victims of the United States enemies, and unworthy victims are those who are the victims of the United States
are
allies.
its clients.
Yeah.
So when, say, the Russians invade Afghanistan, the Afghans are worthy victims because the enemy is attacking them. And in fact, reporting from Afghanistan during the Russian invasion was from the side of the Mujahideen. That's where reporters went to work with the guerrillas. And when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, it's exactly the opposite. Reporters didn't go work with the Taliban, you know. They reported from the point of view of the American army.
So in which case, I'm interested in how sincere your expression of admiration for journalists is.
Pardon?
I want to push you on how sincere your admiration that you expressed before for journalists. How sincere can that be if you're saying that they locate themselves on this side or that side, depending on what's going on? They accept the frame and the narrative. Yeah. That sounds like a criticism to me.
Well, actually, that's the one point in which Ed and I somewhat disagreed about the whole thing. I think to have the book refer to the media is too narrow, because I think that applies to the whole intellectual class. That's the way intellectuals are, overwhelmingly, all through history. Intellectuals overwhelmingly are servants of power. Now, intellectuals write history, so when you read what they write, they look very noble and adversarial and so on. But when you look at what actually happened, all the criticisms we make of the media apply to them, and that's significant because none of the institutional factors hold in that case. The institutional factors that we looked at have to do with the corporate structure, you know, the advertisers who purchase it, but that's not true.
And that doesn't apply to the academy?
That doesn't apply to a college professor. There are other pressures, but not those. But the outcome is pretty much the same.
This is, again, slightly off the topic, but if that is the case, what made you so different?